Hi, a few months ago I made a video entitled I Hate Theoretical Computer Science, Why? And I wanted to get your reactions as to why you hated, quote unquote, the theoretical computer science class. And a lot of you gave really great opinions, but I never had a chance to really read them or get a chance to respond to them. So that's what we're going to do here today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give my initial reaction to each one of your comments. I have not read any of these in advance. These are my genuine reactions to each of your comments. So I'm going to start at the very first one that was posted by John Killfeather. For me, it was the non-intuitive nature of the concepts like DFA cake, NFA was okay, Turing machines were weird, Turing machines running Turing machines was a nightmare, and then all the end part with the P and NP stuff was horrible. I totally understand that the concepts get more difficult as it goes on because the model itself becomes more complicated. And the fact that a Turing machine can actually get its own source code and have it written on the tape, that I know that is a little complicated, which is why we have various theorems to help us prove, let's say, undecidability of certain languages, such as Rice's theorem, which is a really nice way of characterizing a lot of undecidable languages. So I totally understand your points there. Hari Varsha says, how about seeing application in the real world? How to use the concepts to create something novel? So I'm not sure what your second question about creating something novel, but there's a lot of applications in the real world, such as any kind of regular expression matching. Those are used everywhere, such as email validation or username validation. If you've ever used a compiler before, and I'm sure you have, there's a context-free grammar essentially built into them. So Turing machines themselves aren't really that applicable in the sense that I'm not going to go write a Turing machine on my computer and then simulate it, unless I'm doing research about Turing machines, which I'm probably not going to do. The point of Turing machines is to get a model that's equivalent to what a real computer can do. And so that's the application, to be able to understand formally what a real computer can do without having to resort to all of the complexity that a modern computer has, whereas this relatively simpler Turing machine model can achieve all that for us. Sir Bedivere, I hope I'm not pronouncing that wrong. I also agree that the complexity at the very end is kind of hard and may turn people away, especially if the instructor is bad. I remember taking a discrete math class before where we studied how the traveling salesman problem is related to graph theory. Well, it's not necessarily related, it is part of graph theory. I thought that was cool and somewhat difficult, but paid it no mind. 8 weeks later, at the end of the theory of computing class, the last exercise straight up said, show that TSP is NP complete. Holy S word. I'm not sure if I can really respond to any of this because these problems are going to be asked. We present these problems to you for a reason because we want you to understand what NP complete in this case means. Miriam Al-Soroji, I think, said, I don't like the way the professor teaches us in the university. He talks in such a complex way. The content of this course is too much, but it's interesting. Your videos made me understand and study easily for the quizzes and exams. Well, thank you. So the important thing is that the models that we understand here, or at least teach here, are sufficiently less complicated than they could be, but the fact that they're able to do the things that we use on a regular quote-unquote computer every day, that is one of the nice things about the models that we study. Austin Schaff said, I just finished the class yesterday. Our school calls it Formal Languages of Automata, and I used your videos a ton for it. I loved the every part of the class that wasn't proofs. Yeah, proofs are somewhat inherently complicated, or at least I think they're inherently hard, because it's a fundamentally different way of trying to reason about stuff. Generally, we hand wave through various things. We don't necessarily need the formalism and the preciseness of proofs every single time. But there are some times when we're dealing with infinite sets or infinite collections where we can't just exhaust all the possibilities, where we have to argue in a more general way and try to exploit the properties of the various languages and problems that we talk about. Building DFA, NFA, PDA, all the models was a ton of fun and really challenging. I really like building the different languages such as context-free grammar, simple grammar, unrestricted grammar, etc. Some things I didn't like were, but I am aware you have videos on, are the pumping lemma, because that's a proof thing. Proving closure properties of languages like context-sensitive grammar, again proof. Rice's theorem, proof. So this person writes completely theory, I'm guessing you mean complexity theory of Turing machines, and just general proofs. I found it confusing, P versus NP complete, and again, all of those are proofs. But again, all of those things are infinite sets, and you need to be able to argue about them in a very general way. Dave says, honestly, the grading at my school is really bad. We'll let you know when I get final grades back. You didn't let me know, Dave. You never got back to me. Catherine Liu, who got 17 upvotes, which is amazing, said, I actually really like the material itself and solving the proof questions, but I can't see how these are going to be relevant in my future career. Despite doing good, you probably mean well, in my theory course, I don't usually do well in other programming-based courses, so I don't know how this would help. So I get this all the time, that like the material in the class is not applicable, and I addressed this in an earlier question. But the thing is that it's not actually relevant. The material itself probably isn't going to be relevant in your career, maybe other than like regular expressions and context-free grammars. You're gonna use those most likely. But even if that weren't the case, you're going to be using formal and precise writing in order to communicate important ideas to people. And this course is about how to write in a formal and precise way in the computer science domain. That's the thing that you're going to be using in your career, undoubtedly. And if you don't, well, I wish you good luck. Dave Aminana said, the professor was terrible, but I love the material and everything that tackles. That's good. Well, not the professor being bad, the course being good. That's good. Anthony Joseph said, I finished my intro to theory class yesterday. The CFL pumping lemma proof you did on WW is not a CFL, was on my exam. I watched that proof before the exam and helped during the exam. Thank you very much. She didn't really answer my question, but it's fine. Thank you very much anyway. Unit 220 says, I like the class, but only because I had your videos. My professor was basically your TA this year. He would introduce topics and then you teach it to me. However, this is actually the second time I've taken the class. The first time I hated it because my professor would spew a bunch of high-level technical theory at us and thus say stuff like it's really easy. He didn't break down things like you. Basically, I have no problem with the content of the course and actually like it now that I've seen your vids, but there's a big issue with professors not really knowing how to teach it. So I've seen this over and over, and one thing that we should inquire of you, or at least I should inquire of you, is try to do some introspection. I'm not saying that the professor was great and that you're completely wrong, but the thing is that I hear this so often that I'm starting to not believe it anymore. That a lot of students are saying, oh, my professor was terrible, but I watched your videos and therefore then I learned it. One of the things that you should be aware of is, are you paying attention and actually looking at the material and preparing for it in your actual class versus just watching some person's video on it? Because the vast majority of professors teach this subject in almost the same way. It's not that one person does it significantly differently than other people. So just be aware that things like this could happen. Of course, your professor could be actually terrible, but one thing I recommend is just do a little bit of introspection. Thanks. Okay, I'm going to butcher this name. Saya Nurag Kumori, sorry about that. My professor was unavailable and generally rude at points. I actually genuinely enjoyed all the NFA and DFA and Turing machines. I think there needs to be a way to teach proofs properly. I think it handled rather poorly. So one thing that I would recommend is actually enumerate the reasons why you think it was done poorly, other than your professor was generally rude. Genuinely rude. So I'm not sure what that actually entails, so I can't really give a whole bunch of commentary here, but thank you for your input though. Hafiz Arslan Amjad, sorry about that. Only if the could do something impractical. So again, I've addressed those in earlier comments. Mark Hanna said, my professor was unavailable and made his exams way trickier than the homework, so my grades sunk as a result, and I didn't understand most of the material until I had to take the final. So I see this over and over too, that the exams were just way more difficult than the homeworks. And there are some cases where some professors I know in this subject have put the literal homework question directly into the test, like verbatim copied and paste, and the homework grade was astoundingly high when the exam grade was astoundingly low. So the important thing about homeworks is that they prepare you for the test. The questions that are asked on homework are going to be asked in the same format as on the test generally. Again, I can't comment on your exact situation because professors could, in principle, be terrible, but just again, like I said earlier, do a little bit of introspection first. But thank you for your input. Hector G said, disliked it a lot because mainly I just didn't see the use for it. Again, I've addressed this earlier. I'm just a simple CS major. I just want to get a job as a software developer and that's it. Okay, so if you said, I just want to do X and I don't want to do any more than that, I don't want to learn anything at all, that sounds pretty terrible to me as a career. The whole point of being a software developer, or really just a CS major, is that you want to learn all that you possibly can. If you just said, oh, I want to be a programmer and I never want to amount to anything, I'm not saying you're saying that, but if you said that, then I would just say good luck to you. But if you want to have an open mind, I'm not saying that you don't, if you have a closed mind to new ideas, then I again wish you good luck. The class had a bit of math logic and proofs which made it dreadful. All in all, things didn't click, quote unquote, click for me and struggled to understand the reasoning behind most of the things taught there. I you meant barely, passed with a C, but I'm pretty sure that the professor heavily curved it since he even said it was a difficult class and a lot of people failed the exam. So one thing is that the subject, I believe, is inherently difficult. And I want to do some actual research on why it is inherently, or at least I think inherently difficult, because it's a different way of learning. It's a different way of presenting ideas. It's not just like programming where you just say, oh, just use this concept and then you're good to go. Whereas if you looked at, let's say, assembly language, then you have to know exactly what's happening at every single step. And the same thing is true here, but it's a more abstract way of thinking, which is why I think it's more inherently difficult. But it doesn't necessarily click for some people, and that's absolutely okay. So one way that you could appreciate this more is if you go into more advanced subjects, so to speak, when you talk about, say, complexity theory as an example. The ability of presenting how hard a particular problem is when they are all decidable, those are really, really awesome things because they are directly applicable. We actually will solve these. And if we can prove the hardness of one of them, then that's great. But the problem here is that it's not so applicable because we're showing a hardness, quote unquote, for problems that are undecidable. There's no algorithm at all. And the thing is that it's not directly applicable, and I totally understand that. Justin B. Stuffer said, I found the class super interesting and I like the theoretical aspect of it, but my teacher made the class awful. He graded way too harshly and expects everyone to understand it the way he does. So my usual philosophy is if you present 30% of a proof correctly, you should probably get 30% because that's how much of the proof you did correctly. It's hard to quantify generally how much to actually give, but that's what my philosophy has always been. If you present X amount of proof done, that's how much you should do. Watch probably 10 or more of your videos on repeat before my final though, so that should help. Thank you for that. Dulas Shahid said, what a coincidence, just wrote my exam for Theory of CS. First of all, I liked the class and enjoyed the concepts. Will I study it further? I don't think so, and that's totally fine. Everyone has a different perspective on things. Mainly because I'm not sure how this will help me in my career. I already addressed that. For example, finite state machines are cool and all, but when will I ever use these concepts? Finite state machines are used everywhere when you're dealing with regular expressions. They're used everywhere. I hope that you're able to get it at least from watching this video, but hopefully you will. I wish someone would tell us where these concepts are applicable and so on. The professor probably did, and you probably should have been paying more attention. I'm not accusing you of anything, but if the professor did, which is very likely the case, then you may not have heard that part. Second, we were taught proving code correctness. Again, I don't know if we still do this in the industry. Proving code correctness is important, obviously. To prove that a code is actually correct and does the right thing, that's absolutely important. I get that a test suite can never show that your code is 100% correct. That's what the theory course is effectively saying. But this is where correctness proofs come into, you wrote pay, I think you meant play. But if we started proving every program after coding, it would take us forever to finish a full program. So the thing is that it's not about you proving that the program is correct. It's a program proving that the program's correct, that is completely automated, that you don't have to do anything yourself. Just, hey, is my code correct? Then it can tell you whether or not it's correct and maybe suggest some fixes. There's a lot of research into repairing programs that if you take a program and then send it into this piece of software that will automatically suggest fixes for you if it doesn't pass all of the test cases that you made for it. So these things actually are tested and are a real thing. I also want to mention that my interests are not just becoming a software developer. I do enjoy theoretical CS, but you just said that you don't think that you're going to study it further. And if this leads to better understanding of other sectors of CS, I would happily take those classes. So that's kind of a contradiction to what you said earlier, but fun class, but I don't see applicability. But thank you for your comment. Temp John said, I agree with most of the comments talking about not knowing how this will be used in the future, but also while the course material is fairly interesting, I struggle with it much more than any math course I had to do. May very well be part of a minority here. No, you're not a minority there. But in my case, my main complaints are because there's way too much material to fit into 3 to 4 months. I'm somewhat with you on that it is a lot of material, and trying to fit which topics to talk about are very important. Every time I've taught this class, the main struggle that I've had is trying to fit everything that I want to get into the class into all of the classes that there are. There's always a time crunch in trying to get everything in. And there's a certain point that I want to get to, and there's very little leeway after that, or at least the way that I've taught it before. But thank you for your comment. Harchit Batoya said, I'm more interested in math and physics, but this was a great dive into the world of information theory and how it's like a shadow to the physical universe. So thank you for that. Claudio Benjamin Osorio, he wrote a long comment, said, teaching is about explaining with examples or showing someone something from experience. Most professors don't teach. Instead, they solve. Putting aside how hard a topic can be, my perfect class must have the following. Introduction to the topic. This is going to be a background on what we're going to talk about, why it's important, and where it sits for the upcoming content. Vocabulary or display of basic elements. Okay, so I'm still thinking about most professors don't teach, and I'm just not going to address your comment if that's the way that you're going to address what a professor does. Sorry. Luca Adonis said, I like the material and it's interesting, even the proofs, but they were never explained well. I don't actually believe that. Sorry. And my professor took an even more theoretical look into it than what? You said more theoretical than what? I'm not sure what you're comparing it to. I understood all the concepts covered and can explain them to someone, but all the exams questions involve proofs, which I still have no idea how to tackle at all. So again, I don't know what those proofs are, but I'm going to assume that they're similar to what was asked during, if you had homeworks, and during the class when there were proofs presented. Especially since they tend to be even harder than most theoretical classes. So I'm not sure if you even took those to where you can actually compare it there. For example, when doing DFAs and NFAs, we had to construct an NFA which accepts some DFA language or vice versa and prove its correctness formally, which wasn't explained well. Besides, you just have to be good at proving stuff. So you wrote that in quotes. I'm very doubtful that the professor actually said that, because that would be a horrible comment to actually say. And I could find no resource on this even online. So generally, if you want to prove DFA correctness, what you do is you do an inductive proof. So you look at some strings that are accepted by the thing and then try to build bigger and bigger strings and then try to formally show that every string that's in the DFA is in the language that it supposedly will have, and vice versa. So in general, you could look inductively at what the language is and then try to compare things that way. This is also pretty much the same case for pumping lemma and undecidability proofs, and by P, NP proofs. I was so burnt out, I wasn't even able to follow that properly until I saw a good explanation of the topic a few weeks ago. So yeah, a combination of bad instructor, very difficult questions with not enough explanation, easy to understand, explain, and hard to prove stuff in this course. But I can see the use of undecidability and P versus NP, but I cannot see why I would ever need to know the computer linguistics and blah, blah, blah. I've already covered that. So Colin says, I could write about this for days, but my initial rough thoughts on why I hated this are as follows. The instructor was non-existent. It seemed like she was safeguarding the bank of possible theory questions, so we were never were able to tell if we were doing something right. I feel like this was an issue across the subject aside from channels like yours. It's very hard to find fully worked out solutions to common theory problems, and that's actually why I created the channel in the first place. Alongside that, Peter Linson's introductory book makes assumptions that entire segments of theorems are simple or easy to infer. So I'm not saying that you're wrong here, but I'm doubtful that those phrases are in that book. Maybe they are, and I'm just totally wrong about this, but so put into the comments if I'm actually wrong about that. But generally, we theoreticians try to avoid using those terms because it never actually is simple for some people. It may be simple to us, but it's not simple to everyone. He also had a habit of almost explaining something and then saying, we will leave the remainder of this as an exercise. And yeah, that's a common thing that mathematicians do, unfortunately, mainly because we're lazy sometimes, sorry, with no way to know if you're doing any step correctly. So I actually agree with you on that there, that actually does happen. Moving forward in the course felt impossible because the concepts build off the earlier ones. That is true. That never felt as clearly explained as they should have. It snowballed into an awful mess of incorrectly self-taught theorems. The thing is that if the professor is not teaching the actual proofs of some of those theorems, then they're unqualified. And I'm not calling your professor unqualified, it's just if they weren't doing that, that's some unqualified teaching right there. Because we need to have you at least be somewhat convinced that the theorems are actually correct, instead of just telling you proof by intimidation, hey, this theorem's correct, everybody. And everyone just nods in approval, even though they don't actually know why it's correct. It's not about the theorems themselves, it's about being able to prove other things in the same way. That's the whole point of getting some ground foundation of proving certain things and then trying to jump to new things that we actually do care about. I don't need all the answers given to me, but I would have really appreciated it if Linz or my instructor were able to include full examples of solved problems while showing each and every step, no matter how simple it may seem. Whenever I get the chance to make this book, that's what I'm intending to do. My biggest problem was the instructor, but I honestly feel like a lot of the way things are presented made the subject much harder than it needs to be. Channels like yours or Nesso Academy show that it is possible for this material to be split into a streamlined, easy to follow lesson plan. But from what I can see, none of the actual college courses have made an attempt to follow suit. So I don't actually agree with you on that for the most part. Maybe that it is true for your case, but I'm doubtful. Oscar Jarkin Pablo said, I recently took this course. I honestly found it pretty challenging to learn these concepts, which kind of made me more determined to learn more about it. I just found it strange that oftentimes when trying to learn other methods, a lot of instructors in videos, to include yours, varied in different methods of approach, and that's one of the things that you should be getting from this, is that there are multiple ways of proving things. I specifically had this issue with the pumping lemma of regular languages and CFGs. I liked the course, it was just the most confusing course I've ever taken because of reasons above, and I do agree that it is quite challenging to some people. Jewel Harper said, I actually like this class a lot. Honestly, if there was one thing I didn't like, it was the Sipser textbook. I usually am quick to catch on, but that pumping lemma, with an ellipsis there. But I honestly enjoyed your videos to the point when I actually watched stuff we didn't even cover. Also, class needs more diagrams and maybe more of an explicit strategy to approach these types of problems. Again, when I eventually make this book, that's the approach I'm going to have. Like with your pumping lemma, you had listed steps and strategies, choose a string that is the essence of the language or just on the boundary of being in the language. Showing proofs is great, and then giving an algorithm, quote unquote, of the steps is even better, and adding diagrams helps with dual encoding and engages multiple learning styles. Even better, teaching how to understand what the question's even asking. Absolutely, and that's the point I keep making. Thank you for that. CMAX101 said, I felt like my instructor expected us to make a lot of leaps and inferences that they found intuitive, but I certainly did not. I like that your videos focus on the motivation of why we are trying to solve what feel like very arbitrary and abstract proofs. You also don't skip steps, which I felt my instructor often did. That's mainly for time reasons, and I do that sometimes, unfortunately, but it's mainly for time reasons. The feedback on our assigned proofs was also slow and lacking this semester. Reading several other comments, I just want to echo the sentiment that it would be nice to have more introduction to the topics, maybe a background on what we will talk about, why it's important, and where it sits for the upcoming content. I've addressed that already. It was not until the end of the course that I started to see the connections to how these topics might help you determine if an algorithm is even possible. It seems obvious now, but this really would have helped me at the start of the course. I want to enjoy the material. It was just too much too fast this semester, and I somewhat agree to that, and I've addressed that already. Deku Jacket said, I just feel like I will not be using it ever. I did enjoy the class a little bit once I figured it out. I've already addressed that. Arthur Levitsky said, I just took my exam this Wednesday. After this course, I've got to say that I feel like I'm in a love and hate relationship with CS theory. It made me think of things in a way that I have not thought before. I don't know if this makes sense. Yes, it does. It certainly made me sit and spend weekends trying to understand certain things. I'm glad I took this class even if it was difficult. Although the crunch for time forced me to memorize some material, I certainly feel that I have learned something important that will retain to me in my future. Thank you. Someone actually said it. Thank you for that. Eric Reeves said, as a pure math major and a CS major, people thought that the course would be better for me than other programming courses. For me, the professor was super inconsistent. Most of the proofs were hand-wavy, which ticked me off. The math side, yeah. Again, that's for time reasons, unfortunately. So one thing that I recommend is actually reading the proofs beforehand, and that's where the real learning happens. But then during the actual class, where you've already read about it, you can see additional insight into the thing, such as, could we hand wave some of this proof away, or is the actual technical part of the proof really necessary? And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And being able to distinguish between the two is what makes a good computer scientist. If they provided more rigor and justifications, then it would have been better. I believe that mathematics need to have both rigor and intuition. I absolutely agree. But my Intro to Theory course was not only structured badly, it gave only the intuition with barely any rigor. An example of this is recursive program correctness. There was barely any structure to these proofs. Iterative program correctness proofs were okay. Structural induction was poorly taught. Again, structural induction, upcoming book, it's going to be a thing. CS student said, more focusing on theory which ignore the problems parts. I'm not sure what that means. The professor seems to think that the course is too trivial to explain, doesn't give intuitive examples, so I need videos like yours. Thank you for that. I also don't like constantly giving proofs for stuff that I don't even know what it is about. So the thing is that you need to look at the fundamentals of the course. You need to look at the discrete math stuff, the sets, the functions, the operations on sets, those kinds of things, induction. And then look at the actual definitions of things. Again, definitions are your friend in this course. So if you don't understand what's going on, look at the actual definition of what, say, a regular language is, or what a DFA is, or what a PDA actually is. Looking at the definitions are your best friend. And two, I'm not convinced that it's of any use in the real world. Theory without real world implications seems fiction. Eris Uchicha said, my last instructor did not bother to teach us the concepts read directly from slides. Yes, this happens. I absolutely agree. Had horrible handwriting and a thick accent. Again, this happens, and sometimes it's just hard to understand instructors, unfortunately. Barely assigned any homework assignments. I understand that too. And was largely unavailable. I'm doubtful of that though. And entirely focused on her own research over the class. And there's a video that I've made, which is eventually going to come out, on why professors don't actually read course evaluations, because they have more important things to do, mainly if they're tenure track faculty. Sorry. It's just the nature of the beast sometimes. Patrick Chan said, to be honest, the material itself isn't that bad when explained for high schoolers to understand. You're not in high school anymore. You're in college, or university, or grad school, or something. You need to be able to operate at a higher level than high school. Sorry. Problem with my profs is using dumb ways to purposely make it harder, so I don't actually believe that that's the case. And demotivating them necessarily. I think you meant necessarily. Things like messing with the point system, must answer every true-false question in a section to get one full mark. That is a little weird. Or have questions with confusing grammar when it could have been a simple question. Seriously, it's a theoretical computer science course, not a stickler's English course. Then there's the examples given in class. It's always a super simple example. And when it comes to solving a very difficult one, it's partially solved because we can do the rest, which is something that you should be able to do, but it is a little callous to do it every single time. And I'm not sure if your professor's doing this, but it's just a thing. What would be cool is to show us the base of the simple ones and then throw us a very hard one that's solvable using the same principles shown. And again, book coming. Julian Gomez says, it was a great segue, I think he meant S-E-G-U-E, not segue, to the compilers course, but that's good. Tushar Shakdeva, sorry if pronounced it wrong. It feels like study and not something I want to do as a guilty pleasure or something. Like if I'm in some science major or some finance major, I might watch a show on the television or something happens in real life, which might make me feel that I relate to this. I feel intelligent, I hope you do. I have studied about this. Even with a highly theoretical subject like philosophy, one might feel that way. I even sometimes feel that way with mathematics. It might feel a little weird though. I'm not sure where you're going with this. However, all computer science feels and is presented all around us is that it is good for getting a high-paying job. And I do agree with that sentiment, but it sounds attractive in the beginning, but at one point I'm like, I don't give a F. Let those rat racing a-holes earn all they want. I like my YouTube video better in my cozy comforter laying heavy on me, along with the broken dream that I should have given time to pursue rather than a stupid degree. Thank you for your input. And then the final comment, I'm taking it right now and it seems everything regarding Turing machines is really hand-wavy, like Rice's theorem was basically, we just serialize a TM, feed it into another, then do it again, get a contradiction, and boom, Rice's theorem. Which is one of the great things about proving things, is that you can get these amazing results just by doing a little bit more and trying to prove something in general. And then now your proofs become a lot easier instead of having to do this whole reduction thing, which is a pain in the butt to do. So those are all the questions, at least until the recording of this video. So thank you everyone for your input, including the ones that I didn't agree with. So hopefully that was interesting. Leave your thoughts about my thoughts into the comments down below. As always, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. There are many other links in the video description if you want to support the channel further. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.